With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, favorite of ours. She's our Western correspondent because she's out there in beautiful Denver, Colorado, up there in the Rocky Mountain High. Krista Kafer. She is an opinion columnist for the Denver Post. Also does a lot of did a whole week's worth of radio you need to go listen to. Did a great job with that. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Great. It's hot here, but at least it's dry heat.
Denver's weird weather-wise. People told me that when I went out there, and then we went out there in the fall, and it was those autumn 75 days, but it's at altitude, so it's just 75 is actually just almost chilly. Beautiful weather, and they're all like, you got to get out of here by Monday. And Monday was like, it went down in the 60s, and then the next day after that, it poured the snow. The weather out there is just bizarre.
That's Colorado.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it changes fast up at altitude, doesn't it?
It certainly does. But yeah, beautiful days right now, and I can actually cool my house with a swamp cooler, evaporative cooler, which you can't use out east because the air's already too humid.
Yeah,
but
the
North
Carolina house today, it's 98% humidity with no wind. Just brutal stuff. You do not want to have a swamp cooler. You already got one outside. You wrote a piece on tipping. I love talking about this because tipping is one of those things where it's a lot of big policy things and a lot of economic things and a lot of cultural things, but it's something we do every day and we never actually think about it. So what got you talking about tipping? Because that goes to the labor crisis. It goes to wages. It goes to economic. Boy, this just crosses all kinds of streams, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And I don't think I would have actually thought about it, even though like a lot of Americans, I'm kind of irritated by this idea that we have to tip on everything now. Now, I used to be a tipped employee. I worked at Domino's Pizza for years, delivering pizzas. I was a waitress at one point. So, I think it's very important to tip your servers. But back in the day, it was kind of a standard 10%. It was food related, or if you got your hair cut, or maybe if you got a massage, that's when you tipped. But now it's like up to 20%. And the guy at the Starbucks who just hands you a cup of brewed coffee wants a 20% tip on top of a $6 drink. I think people are experiencing a kind of tipflation or tip guilt, this idea that I have to tip everyone everywhere. And so it's frustrating. And then you wonder, at what point does a tip just become a surcharge? I think a lot of people are thinking about this.
The technology part of that, you mentioned Starbucks, they hand it through the window and you get a pick. Not calling anybody out, but I've seen them where they don't ask, they just hit the buttons and I know exactly what to do. Like, gee, I wonder which button they hit. It also, things like a restaurant. I just stayed at a place Sunday, somebody who's, one of my non-kid kids, you have some of those in your life, working her first job, wanted to tip pretty good. I had to ask, like, do you guys split tips? How does this work? She's like, oh, well, I'm the hostess, so I get this percentage off of it. And she explained it to us and then we, reacted accordingly. Not everybody does this differently. There's no set way of doing it, but we do have to acknowledge tipping has been exploited by, especially in the restaurant industry, as a way to keep wages down for a long, long time. There could be some overcorrection here, but then there's also that technology component you just mentioned where it's like, I think there is some of these companies have just figured out like, hey, here's a way to get some free money.
It is, and it feels like a surcharge. And how this all came up is that we've got this very unique restaurant, Casa Bonita, in Denver, and reopened by the South Park guys after they refurbished it. They made an executive decision that they were going to go with no tips and have all of their workers make $30 an hour. And it made sense for them because you pre-order the food, so there was some ambiguity. Who should I tip? Should I tip? And now it's very clear. When no tips, you pay up front, and it's more expensive than it used to be. It is what it is. But I like the clarity because I feel like we're all at the situation where we're trying to figure out. One of the reasons that I kind of resent giving extra money to the barista is baristas generally are paid like regular employees versus a waitress who probably makes half that base wage with the expectation that tips go on top. And so I think what people really want now is just clarity. who should I tip? When should I tip? I think we would miss tipping if we just got rid of it altogether, because I have to admit, I like tipping the gal that does my hair. I think she does a good job. We have a nice relationship, and it kind of feels good, even though she's part owner of the tiny little stylist place. It feels good to put money on top of that because I just really like her. Am I willing to give that up just so that we have some clarity and fair wages all around? Maybe.
Let's slow down though, because people are going to go, wait a minute, they're paying $30 an hour at Casa Bonita. You need to clarify for folks that don't know what this is. Calling Casa Bonita a Mexican restaurant is kind of like calling your corner furniture store IKEA. That's the gap we're talking here, right? Is that a good comparison for people? This place is just out of control, big and over the top, and it's a beloved institution in Denver. You go to Denver, everybody talks about it. It was closed the last time I went to Denver, so we haven't got to go yet. But just explain to people this is like an institutional place. So it's not just that number or $30 an hour. When you say that about that place, everybody knows it. And that's what made it such a talking point.
It's true. And then of course you also have the South Park guys buying it. But so it looks like a big Spanish hacienda. It's Pepto pink, Pepto-Bismol pink. So it's, it stands out. It was built the time that you had all of those theme restaurants. Now, we don't have theme restaurants as much now, but back in the 60s and 70s, Denver had a whole bunch of theme restaurants. You could go to the White Fence Farm and have a home-cooked dinner on this, farm-like place. There was a place with a big organ grinder with a clapping monkey and black and white films. There's all these like really neat theme restaurants, which we really don't have anymore. And the one that kind of remains, and the Spaghetti Factory as well. But we have this Casa Bonita. Well, it was featured in a South Park episode. So when it went up for sale, those, the South Park guys, they bought it and they refurbished it. I guess they put millions of dollars in it because, as I think all of us who ate there can attest, it hadn't actually been fixed up for, I don't know, maybe 4 decades. I think they still, I'm not even sure the decor had been dusted. It was looking a little grim the last time I was there, but it was always cliff diving into this big pool, Mexican food, a cave of doom that you would kind of go, Pirate's Cave, and you would go in there and be, skeletons which would have fallen apart because they were decades old. But it's like an experience. It used to be kind of like shabby cool experience because everything was kind of broken. Half the games in the arcade didn't work. And the food was kind of uniformly terrible. Now I guess the food is better, but they still have all the attractions. So it's sort of the new and improved Casa Bonita. And that's part of why I think this whole tipping thing came to my attention, was there were articles about Casa Bonita and this change up, which I think was a good choice.
You just touched on a big part of this is the ownership decided we're going to do this. We're going to have clarity.
Yeah.
In the service industry. And part of this, we got to acknowledge here too. One thing COVID did was it put a spotlight on the service industry because those people just got screwed left, right, and center by everybody. The service industry, where you're going to see a lot of the tipping stuff and gratuities and things like this, there's not a lot of uniformity. Like you said, there's not a lot of clarity on tipping, although some places will have it on the menu or whatever. The reaction to this is, well, we need to have it uniform. The problem is, this is all individually leadership based. I don't know that you can have uniformity because I really don't know that you want the government to start regulating tips. That sounds like something that's going to be a problem. And that's the first thing I've seen a lot of people call for is like, well, of course, this gets lumped into the minimum wage argument and all that stuff. This stuff isn't one size fits all. And if you start trying to regulate it one size fits all, you're probably going to wind up making it worse. So what do we do besides just voting with our feet and our wallet and our hard-earned dollars?
I'm with you. I don't want the government weighing in. They'll just make things worse like they most often do. I think it is going to be a place-by-place thing, and I think it's going to be a personal choice. I've basically stopped tipping on orders in which it's not really a service experience. If you sit down at a restaurant, somebody's coming up to your table multiple times, getting drinks, bringing your food, chatting with you. That's a situation where I really feel it's very appropriate to tip 20%. If I go to the movie theater bar, to carry a glass of overpriced wine into the movie in a plastic cup, the last time I did that, I paid $18 for a cup of wine that I don't think the bottle was more than $10. So and then I had to put a tip on top of that. That's kind of where I feel funny about it. Yeah. Because it feels weird to say no and to hit that no button. But I think if it's just something that's being handed to me, I'm not going to tip anymore. If it's something where there's an ongoing service component, of course I'm going to tip. It's especially since there is a wage issue there, they're counting on those tips. Here's where I'd like some clarity though. If I get a massage, it's customary to tip the person who gives the massage. If I get Botox though, is that medical? Should I tip that person? There's just all this ambiguity, and I think it's up to us and the different stores, restaurants, massage places to, I guess, give us some sense of clarity.
Krista Kafer joining us. Do we not talk about the service sector industry correctly? I know you do other stuff like radio and things like this, and you teach communications. You're a communications expert, for lack of a better word. We don't talk about the service industry correctly, do we? Whether it's economically, the cultural impact, because these are the people we see every day, literally every day, whether it's a grocery store. I wrote about this too during COVID. Across the street, the two schools, the elementary school and the high schools, across the street from the grocery store and the little shopping center. Same people every day in one, but everybody goes over there, everybody gonna die, but everybody's over here. You could see the cultural clash of that. And you had the teachers who aren't allowed to work because the health crisis, but it's the same people at the grocery store. We never really dealt with that part of all this, have we? We don't really know how to talk about the service industry, appreciating these folks. Obviously the service industry isn't going to pay like the top scientists at NASA, but at the same time, I don't think we have an appreciation, and we haven't figured out how to talk about the economic and cultural impact of a service sector that is a huge part of the economy that people didn't really pay attention to pre-COVID. And I think some of this is the hangover of that now is like, oh, well, we know how important these people are, and we all saw them get really, really screwed. Let's just call it what it was. Now we want to tip them. That's part of this conversation, isn't it?
I think so. And also it's because the service sector is going to continue to grow. As we have, we're a wealthy nation. We can now afford to pay people to do things that we would have already done ourselves. We pay people to walk our dogs, for example. I've been paid, I take one-off services. Somebody paid me to design their landscape, and I gave them some help in that process. I think a lot of folks, whether you're Gen X, Millennial, or Z, chances are you have a bunch of different jobs. I say chances are more so than the generation boomers. That was one job for life, basically. I do all kinds of stuff. I do estate sales for people sometimes. I do landscape design, teach some. I do a lot of editing. I love doing editing. So I'm kind of a Swiss Army knife with a certain number of tools on it. And it's interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. How do we pay people? How do we treat people? It's an interesting subject. And it's a subject I think that not only because of COVID, but because we are going into a deeper service economy with fewer factory jobs and fewer of those kinds of jobs and more services, including recreational entertainment services, also medical services. It's just it's an interesting day. I've even been paid to like organize somebody's house for them. Rewind the clock 20 years ago, like nobody did that. It's just interesting.
Yeah, Krista Kafer joining us. I think there's something happening culturally and politically here and the service. I think the service sector is kind of the leading edge of this stuff because, again, that's where you're going to see economic trouble first, right? Cash registers don't ring quite as often. Stores aren't as crowded. We know the reverse of that too with the toilet paper stuff, right? You get runs on things,
Yeah.
like that.
Oh, good
The
grief.
service sector is such a cutting edge of what's happening economically, culturally, politically. Look, I'll be honest. I've wrote pieces off what I overhear standing in line at the grocery store, because you just hear people talking, or at Starbucks, or just, what are normal people that aren't chronically online like us? What are they talking about? I find the service sector to really be this kind of area where we don't pay attention to it, but we all, like, no matter how rich you are, unless you're just having everything delivered to your house, everybody from poor to rich is dealing with this service sector. It's really the one part of the economy and the one part of culture and the one part of politics. Everybody's in that pool to some extent. So why don't we pay more attention to it? Because we could probably do more there, because you know how we do. We all focus on all these outliers instead of this thing where, well, wait a minute, everybody's involved in this. Maybe we should take some of our lessons from this big pool of people instead of this crazy outlier, in New Jersey or wherever. That seems like we just don't pay enough attention to this, do we?
Yeah, it is interesting. Like, I do think we're having a lot of discussion on what jobs should pay. But, in markets, it's supply and demand. Nothing is really worth anything innately. And I'm talking about anything, both a product or a service. Obviously, a human being, has immeasurable worth. Every single human being. But certain jobs pay certain amounts. Certain products get certain amounts. And those amounts are determined both by demand and supply. So, I think there's that kind of economic complexity to it, but then there's also the human complexity of making sure that people, the person that works at the grocery store has a decent wage and an ability to support a family. We've also got the issue of automation coming in some situations where politicians have said, okay, we're going to raise up all of these minimum wages to a certain level. If that level is not tenable in the marketplace, those shops and stores are more likely to turn to automation. And so you'll see situations where you order your own food, and then maybe somebody just brings it to you, so they don't have to have as many staff. So there's a lot of complexity to this. I will say, on a human level, if you ever see somebody mistreating a waiter, waitress, somebody at a shop, I think it's important to step in and say, excuse me, you don't need to be treating that person like that, or offer to go and get a manager for the person who's being berated, because nobody should have to be abused verbally by another person. It's just, the adults in the room need to step up and say, excuse me, you need to stop, to the person that's doing the abuse.
Yeah, waitressing and customer service jobs, are for public-facing customer service jobs. They got to update that. Are some of the hardest jobs. Who's got a really hard job now, and I've noticed it more and more? The person that's in charge of watching the self-checkouts. I see those people getting more unfair abuse than any. And look, I've come around. I used to hate them. Now I love them. Now I don't even want to go to the other ones. I'm a it's funny when new people roll into my grocery store that I go to pretty much daily. I was like, come here, let me show you how to use this thing real quick, because I know more about it than they do. Because I know how to turn it off, so don't talk to me. I don't like machines that talk to me. That's first.
I turn them off too.
Yeah, I had a new employee that she's like, how'd you turn that off? I can't stand listening to all this. I was like, oh, you just push this button. That person, I've watched that job that did not exist 5 or 6 years ago, really, to any extent. I've watched that evolve to one of the hardest jobs I see daily now, is that self-checkout person, as far as just taking abuse. It's not their fault that the banana was not properly labeled or whatever. No, they're not there to go get your one more kumquat, that, whatever the craziness is. That's where I've seen a lot of abuse. And that's a job that didn't even exist for the previous generation, because there was no such thing as self-checkout. And it's just one of those examples of society changed, the technology evolved, and now, waitressing's still tough. Now that person's got a real hot button job, and it didn't even exist before. And now that's the one I watch. What you're talking about is like, okay, are they abusing that person? Because that's a tough job.
It is. And a lot of these places are understaffed, at least here in Denver. So you have one waitress working an entire floor. And I do think it's important not only to treat that person well and to tip that person well, but also, as needed, step in if somebody's being nasty, because I get people are frustrated. We're all frustrated at different times over different issues, but no one has the right to treat another person as though they are beneath them. It's just wrong.
Krista Kafer. Okay, I got to ask you one political question before I let you go. I find Colorado one of the real fascinating states over the last few years. There's a couple places I kind of watch to see what's going on, big pictures, places like Atlanta. Colorado's another one of them because y'all are interesting. You've got a little bit of everything out there. You've got everything from Governor Paulus, openly gay Democrat, to Lauren Boebert, all right there in one little area. That's quite the spectrum. What's the feeling out there right now? Because and I don't think I'm talking out of school here. The state GOP is kind of a mess right now. They're having a lot of infighting. Well, I don't want to spend 45 minutes on it, but it's not good. They're not doing real great. This state, is it a purple state? Is it a bellwether state? There's so much going on there that kind of microcosms the national. I find it really interesting. You're there, though, for the outsiders just looking in. What should they be watching in Colorado over the next 14, 15 months of this election?
It used to be a bellwether state. It used to be a purple state. It is now a solidly blue state. It's no different than California, Maryland, Massachusetts. There are conservative pockets, but because the Front Range is so it's so heavily blue. And Front Range, Colorado is basically sort of we'll say almost half flat, which people don't expect, but the eastern part is completely flat. Then you hit the mountains, and of course that's there's mountains there. Along the Front Range is where most of the population lives, right at that borderland. And we've had so many folks coming in from Illinois, California, and other places that fled high tax states, but these people are solidly Democrat. So it really did turn the state blue. Then you have complete idiocy within the party, which caused a lot of normal Republicans to leave the party. The state party is a complete hot mess, full of conspiracy theorists and lunatics. And so it turns off normal people who are like, there's actually a lot of moderates in this state that are uncomfortable with extremes on both sides, and Republicans cannot recapture some of those voters until the whole Trump conspiracy theory thing goes away. Colorado will be blue for the foreseeable future. I say this as somebody who's a Republican, so I wish it could go back to being purple.
Yeah, talk radio is doing really well out there, though, because those folks, they still listen to their media, don't they? Krista Kafer, love having you with us. Let everybody know where they can keep up with you. You, of course, write for the Denver Post. You do other stuff. You also have a Substack where you re-up a lot of your stuff and your wonderful social media. Let folks know where they can keep up with you until we get you back on Heard Tell again.
So you can follow me at Krista Kafer. My Substack is on there. You can also, it's Krista Kafer, both with Ks. About 4 days after I published with the Denver Post, I put that piece back up. I've also got some bigger essays that are kind of interesting, but you'll need to subscribe for those.
Worth it. I do. Y'all should too. Krista Kafer, appreciate your time, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.
Somos la máquina.